Train the muscles, not the joints.
Welcome back to Natural Gallant Bodybuilding. Mountain. And today I'm going to talk to you about a missing principle that isn't talked about enough in YouTube fitness or Instagram fitness. And this principle or motivating factor of why you try to get in shape or try to build muscle or become better at whatever endeavor you're engaging in. In this case, we're talking about bodybuilding and putting on muscle and losing body fat. If your motive is based on suffering of some sort, even something as subtle as an internal boredom or restlessness, like a need to have purpose, you are going to be subtly blinded to what truly works. Now, in the path to acquiring wisdom, you have to embrace the fact that the clearer you are able to perceive what's happening, the better you are going to be able to make decisions. You're going to be seeing things more clearly if you're not living in your head or living in your emotions and feeling all sorts of stuff and then making knee-jerk reactions or decisions in your training or in your life. This is where, meditation or some sort of understanding that there are certain things inside you that you could say are like radio static, that you just have to allow to move through you, but you don't necessarily let those energies or those experiences dictate what your next action's going to be, right? So say somebody is really bored, that's their thing. They're always bored. They always need something to do. You could see very easily how a person who is driven by that boredom, who always needs to train, could enter into overtraining. So let's just say somebody is driven by boredom. You could see very easily how if somebody is driven by boredom and they're always taking action based on that boredom, that they could train perhaps too much because they're not necessarily looking at why they're training. They're not necessarily looking at the sensations they're having in the body. They're listening to the boredom, not necessarily to what's physically happening in their body at the time. So the same thing goes for insecurity, or say a fear of doing something wrong, or maybe somebody is afraid of not being good enough. So you could see that insecurity would affect their decisions, where they may do something because they're more worried about being wrong or worried about not being good enough, instead of focusing all that awareness on the sensations that the body is giving them, instead of the emotional drama or the mental drama that they're overlaying over top of their training and their bodybuilding endeavors, right? So because of this, when you're driven by these internal forces, which are more, you could say, identity driven, or not necessarily ego as far as bad ego, but just an identification with your suffering, you're not going to be able to see as clearly when it comes down to making decisions about what's right for you. Because you're driven unconsciously by these certain forces that you don't have to be driven by. You see, so if there's a restlessness in you, or if there's some sort of need to move, you're driven by the need, but not necessarily listening to whether you should need, whether it's a good thing for the body to take that action or not. So if we're going to simplify this, you could just look at somebody who is insecure about looking strong to other people because their identity is wrapped up in that. You'll see that they'll lift heavy at any cost in order to impress people around them, but they're not necessarily listening to whether the body wants to lift heavy at that time or not. They might not even listen to an injury that they may have because they're so invested into projecting a certain vision or a certain idea of themselves. So you see this on YouTube a lot. You see this with a lot of businesses, and they call it branding, right? They're so busy with the branding and pushing their idea outwards that they're not necessarily in the moment and responding to what is needed. So sometimes branding can be a nice conversation, meaning that, hey, this is what I can help you with. I'm branding bodybuilding, so I'm talking about branding a little bit on this channel, right? But once the branding becomes more important than the person in front of you, then you become out of alignment with what's happening, out of alignment with reality. You're not necessarily in relationship with who you are serving. So the branding at that point has to be dropped. So it's the same thing with your training. The motivation of why you're training has to become purified. And when that happens, and you're not driven by these unconscious forces within you, stuff like restlessness or just worry or anxiety or even depression. If you're driven by all that stuff, you're using the exercise to cover up an underlying motive. But wouldn't you want that motive to become purified instead? So as much as in the beginning stages, the exercise can be a great medicine for this internal drama that people have going on, at some point you want to also purify that internal drama. And by doing so, you then start to have more wisdom when it comes down to physical things. You start to be able to see what's happening with your body more clearly, and you're not tainted by insecurity or by suffering in any way, shape, or form. And that is a really free experience, because then you start to really discover what's going on with you and your body, because your relationship becomes deeper, because your awareness is not tied up in some sort of story. It's more here and now with what is happening. So if you haven't gotten to this place yet in your training, that's fine. But at some point, if you want to evolve to a higher level, right? This is where you're going to have to go. This is something that you're going to have to look at and evolve into. And the thing is that it makes training more fun, because relationship with something, like direct relationship, is what brings the fulfillment to the action that you are taking, right? So yeah, I find these types of subjects aren't really talked about much. I know that we could talk about a lot of technique things, a lot of things about techniques and exercises and stuff, but I find the underlying motive of why a person is training is so important, because when that motive is addressed and purified, then the person is truly open to learning, instead of just projecting what they think should work based on some sort of suffering game they have going on inside. So yeah, I hope this helps out in your training. Thanks a lot for watching. If you need to get a hold of me, just go to naturalgallantbodybuilding.com, and thanks to the Patreon supporters, and take care for now. Mountain. Natural Gallant.